It started with a sound, the soft, distant tap, tap, tap of rain against my window. At first, I thought it was my imagination, the kind of soft rhythm you hear when your body's too tired to move, but your mind refuses to rest. My bones ached, my throat burned, and every breath felt like I was inhaling through fire. I knew it was the flu. I knew I needed to rest, but rest wasn't something I was allowed to have anymore. Paisley, my daughter, in-law's voice ripped through the hallway like a siren. "Are you still in bed? The floor is filthy. You can't even see how dirty it is." Her voice had that sharp, cutting tone, the one that could slice right through your spine. I froze under the blanket. For a second, I thought maybe she was talking to someone else, but no. She never missed a chance to remind me that I didn't belong here anymore. Before I could answer, I heard my son's voice, colder, flatter, and so painfully distant. "Mom," he said, "you eat for free. At least do something." That one hurt, not because of what he said, but because of how he said it. My son, Evan, my only child, the boy I raised alone after his father died. The one I worked double shifts for, skipped meals for, prayed for. The one who used to bring me wildflowers from the park and say, "One day I'll take care of you, Mom." And now, this was taking care. I smiled weakly, not out of peace, but to hide the pain clawing inside me. "All right," I said softly, "I'll get up." I threw the blanket aside and stood slowly. My knees trembled, the room spun, but I forced myself to walk. I picked up the mop and started cleaning. Each stroke of the mop felt heavier than the last, not because of the floor, but because of what had settled inside me over the years: disappointment, exhaustion, invisibility. Still, I said nothing. Because in this house, silence had become my only survival. If you've ever been made to feel small, if your kindness has been mistaken for weakness, hit subscribe, like, and comment below, because this is her retaliation. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I remember cooking dinner while Amber scrolled through her phone on the couch. I could hear her fake laughter, that high, plastic sound that grated against my nerves. She was watching some influencer's vlog, talking about self, care, and mental health. The irony almost made me laugh. Evan came home late, smelling of office coffee and cheap cologne. He didn't even look at me when he sat down at the table. "Did you mop?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "Good." He muttered, scrolling through his phone again. We ate in silence. Amber complained about the food being too salty. Evan said nothing. I sat quietly, forcing each bite down as if it were glass. After dinner, I cleared the plates while Amber and Evan disappeared into their room. I could hear their muffled laughter through the walls. And me, I just stood in the kitchen, looking out the small window above the sink, watching the rain fall over the empty street. I don't know what it was about that moment, but something inside me cracked. Maybe it was the silence. Maybe it was the loneliness. Maybe it was the cruel thought that I had raised a man who no longer saw me as human. But I knew deep in my bones something had to change. I went to my room, sat on the bed, and opened my phone. I hadn't touched it in days. There were dozens of unread messages. Among them, one from a lawyer, a name I recognized instantly. My late husband's old attorney. The subject line simply said, "Regarding Mr. Campbell's will." I froze. That will had been settled years ago, or so I thought. My hands shook as I opened it. The message was short. "Mrs. Campbell, we've been unable to reach you. Your husband's trust has matured and awaits your acknowledgement. Please contact us to finalize the release." For a long time, I just stared at the screen. I didn't even know what trust meant in this context. My husband had always handled those things, but the number at the bottom, the account balance, made my heart skip. It wasn't small, not at all. And suddenly, for the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Power. The rest of that night was a haze. I sat in the dark, planning silently. Every word, every insult, every cold look from Amber and Evan replayed in my mind like an old movie reel. I could hear Amber's mocking laughter, Evan's indifferent tone, and in between, the echo of my own silence. I realized something brutal yet liberating. They didn't need me anymore, but I didn't need them either. When the clock struck 3 a.m., I stood up and started packing, not frantically, quietly, deliberately. My old suitcase creaked open as I folded my few clothes neatly inside. I looked around the small room one last time. The room they'd let me have. The one with peeling wallpaper and a window that didn't shut properly. Before I left, I placed a note on the dresser. It said only 2 words, "Thank you." Not out of gratitude, but irony. Then I turned off the light, took my bag and stepped outside. The rain had stopped. The world was eerily still. And as I closed the gate behind me, I smiled. A small, quiet smile, because they thought I was weak. They thought I was dependent, but by morning, one move from me would leave them frozen. The sun was only beginning to rise when I stepped onto the empty street. The air was cold, sharp, and clean, the kind that wakes your mind even when your body's still weak. My bag felt heavy in my hand, but lighter than my heart had felt in years. I didn't look back, not once. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't walking away from something. I was walking toward myself. When I reached the main road, the first bus of the morning came groaning to a stop. The driver looked half asleep. "Where to?" he mumbled. "Downtown," I said softly. As the bus pulled away, I caught a faint reflection of myself in the window-tired eyes. Hair graying at the edges, but there was a glint there. A spark I thought I'd lost. The city passed by slowly, still waking up. Coffee shops flicked on their lights. Shopkeepers rolled up shutters, and people in suits hurried with their phones glued to their ears. All around me, life was happening, and for once, I wasn't invisible to it. When I got off the bus, I walked straight to the address from the email. The law firm was tucked into a tall glass building, polished and intimidating. I hesitated at the door, afraid they'd take one look at me worn clothes, tired face, and think I didn't belong. But I went in anyway. The receptionist looked up with a professional smile. "Good morning. Do you have an appointment?" "Yes," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "My name is Paisley Campbell. I received an email about my late husband's trust." She checked her system, nodded, and motioned toward a seat. Within minutes, a tall man in a navy suit appeared, sharp eyes, calm demeanor. "Mrs. Campbell," he said warmly, "I'm Mr. Adams. Thank you for coming." His tone was respectful, something I hadn't heard in months. He led me into his office, and as I sat down, he opened a file thick with papers. "Your husband left a secondary account, a long-term trust that matured last month. It was never claimed, and we were instructed to contact you personally once it did." He slid a paper toward me. "Please review and sign to release the funds." I picked up the pen, my hands trembling slightly. The number written on the form blurred before my eyes. It wasn't a few thousand. It was enough to start over. Enough to breathe, enough to live. When I finally signed, Mr. Adams smiled. "Congratulations, Mrs. Campbell. You deserve this." I nodded quietly, blinking away tears I refused to let fall. I didn't feel rich. I felt free. If you've ever been treated like you were nothing only to rise in silence, hit subscribe, like, and comment below. Because this is her retaliation. That afternoon, I booked a small room at a quiet inn near the countryside. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I turned off my phone and threw away the old SAM card. For the first time in years, I didn't have to check if the dishes were washed or if someone would yell at me for sitting too long. I spent the next few days sleeping, really sleeping. I'd wake up when sunlight touched my face, eat what I wanted, and sit by the window watching the trees sway. And slowly, the fever left me. So did the fear. I thought about Evan and Amber sometimes, wondering if they'd noticed I was gone. But the truth was I didn't care, not anymore. On the fourth morning, as I sipped my coffee, I saw something that made my lips curl into a quiet smile. My phone buzzed a new number, a message that said, "Mom, where are you? Amber and I woke up and you were gone. Are you okay?" I stared at the screen for a long time. No apology, no regret, just confusion and inconvenience. I didn't reply. Instead, I called Mr. Adams again. "You mentioned I could access the trust digitally." "Yes," he said. "Would you like me to arrange that now?" "Yes," I replied, "and I'd like to move the funds into a new account, private." The next few days, I made arrangements quietly with the kind of precision that comes only from years of planning for everyone but yourself. I found a small cottage for rent on the edge of a little seaside town. Peaceful, green, and far away from everything I once called home. I moved there within a week. The air smelled of salt and lavender. The walls were painted white. The floors creaked softly when I walked. It wasn't grand, but it was mine. Every night, I'd sit by the window and write letters I never sent, letters to my younger self. Letters that said, "You did your best. You gave your love. Now it's time to live for you." But as peaceful as it was, there was still one thing left undone. A final move. I wanted them to feel what I had felt, that emptiness, that helplessness. That sudden realization that the person you thought you controlled had walked away and taken everything with her. So I made a quiet decision. I called Evan's office. The secretary told me he'd been fired 2 days ago, apparently. His mom's name had been removed from the company's ownership records. That's when I realized he'd secretly been using my name on a property paper for tax purposes. My name, my late husband's house, the one Evan and Amber lived in, was still legally mine. And I had just gotten the proof through the lawyer. I didn't shout. I didn't storm over. I just called Mr. Adams again. "Mr. Adams, I'd like to reclaim my property." He hesitated. "Mrs. Campbell, that house is currently occupied, I know. I said calmly, by my son and his wife. He went silent for a moment. Understood, I'll proceed with the legal transfer. The papers were ready within a week, and on a quiet Monday morning, I signed them officially reclaiming ownership. By law, they had 30 days to vacate. That morning, as Evan and Amber sat at their breakfast table, a courier knocked on their door. Amber, half asleep, opened it and froze. Notice of property repossession effective immediately. She called Evan, her voice shaking. "Evan, what is this?" He took the paper, reading the signature at the bottom. His face drained of color. Owner, Mrs. Paisley Campbell. By the time the sun rose fully, my phone buzzed again, dozens of missed calls. I ignored them all. I just sat by my window sipping tea as the waves crashed gently outside. They had no idea where I was, no idea how I'd done it, no idea what I'd become. But I knew one thing by the time they realized it all. By the time the walls of that house echoed with silence instead of cruelty, it would be too late. They'd finally feel what I had felt, and I wouldn't need to lift a single finger to make it happen. Because sometimes the coldest revenge isn't fire, it's distance. I woke to the sound of gulls outside my cottage window. The ocean breeze slipped through the curtains, bringing that soft salt smell that always made me feel alive again. I brewed coffee, took the first slow sip, and looked out at the gray water curling against the rocks. I should have felt at peace. I had my freedom, my house reclaimed, my silence intact. But inside me, something restless stirred. All my life I'd been the one who waited for my husband to come home, waited for my son to grow up, waited for respect that never arrived. Now there was no one left to wait for. The emptiness wasn't painful, it was simply unfamiliar. My phone vibrated on the table. Unknown number. I almost ignored it, but curiosity got the better of me. Mom. A shaky voice said when I answered, "It's me, Evan." I stayed quiet. He exhaled heavily. We got the notice, the house. It says it belongs to you. I don't understand. Why would you do this? I looked out the window, watching the waves beat the shore. Because, Evan, I finally remembered it was mine. Amber's been crying all morning, he said, almost pleading. We don't have anywhere to go. There was a long pause before I answered. Then maybe now you'll understand how it feels to have nowhere. I hung up before he could reply. For a long time, I just stood there, breathing. My hand trembled a little, not from guilt, but from release. I had spent years teaching him compassion, but maybe he needed absence to learn it. Later that afternoon, I walked to the small farmer's market near the coast. The vendors already knew me, Miss Paisley. They called me the quiet woman who always bought a single loaf of bread and 2 apples. They smiled when they saw me. I smiled back, and for once, it didn't feel forced. On the way home, my mind wandered to the past. Evan as a child, chasing pigeons in the park, shouting, "Mom, look at me." I'd look every single time, and somewhere along the line, he stopped calling and I stopped being seen. That night, while the cottage grew quiet, I received a new email from Mr. Adams. He'd attached the final property documents and a short message. Transfer complete. Congratulations, Mrs. Campbell. The house is legally yours. Any remaining residents must vacate within 10 days. 10 days. I wondered what Amber was doing in those 10 days. I didn't wish her pain, not really. I only wished for understanding, for her to feel what it's like when someone you look down on suddenly holds the power to decide your future. The following week, I visited the city again. I wore a neat navy dress, my hair tied back. A small silver brooch pinned to the collar, one of the few things my husband had given me that Amber never noticed. The taxi dropped me near the old neighborhood. The moment I stepped onto that street, memories flooded in. The smell of wet pavement, the faint creak of the front gate. I stood across the road from my old house, their house, and watched. The windows were closed, curtains drawn, but I could still picture everything. The furniture I'd chosen, the pictures I'd hung, the laughter that once filled those rooms. I didn't knock. I didn't want a scene. I just needed to see it one last time before it wasn't theirs anymore. Across the fence, a neighbor recognized me. "Paisley, we haven't seen you in months. You all right, dear?" I smiled. "Better than I've been in years." As I turned to leave, I saw the curtains twitch. Amber's face appeared for a second, pale, startled. She stared at me like she'd seen a ghost. Maybe she had. I walked away without a word. If you've ever walked away from people who broke you, and they finally realized what they lost, don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment below. Because this is her retaliation, 3 days later, another call came, this time from an unknown woman. "Mrs. Campbell, this is Sarah from the community shelter. Your son and his wife reached out. They mentioned you might assist with temporary housing." I blinked. They what? She hesitated. They said your family and, perhaps willing to help. I laughed softly. Tell them I wish them well. I said, but I've already helped enough. When I hung up, I sat back, letting the quiet fill the room. I wasn't cruel, I was just. Done that night I couldn't sleep. The wind howled outside. The sea crashed louder than usual. I lit a candle and sat by the window again. I thought about forgiveness. Did I owe it to them? Or to myself? By morning I had my answer. I called Mr. Adams and asked him to draft one more document, a statement giving Evan and Amber access to a small allowance from the trust. Enough for them to start fresh, but not enough to depend on me again. He agreed to handle it discreetly. Then I wrote a letter, not an apology, not exactly just the truth. Evan, you once promised to take care of me. I spent years believing you would. But life has a way of showing us what love really means. I hope this teaches you kindness. I'm not angry anymore. I just hope you learn what I finally did, that strength can look like silence. Mom. I left it unsigned, folded it neatly, and mailed it through Mr. Adams's office. When it reached them, I didn't know. I didn't ask. Weeks turned into months. The seasons shifted, the sky bluer, the air warmer. My garden bloomed with wild daisies. I started volunteering at the local library, reading to children once a week. Their laughter filled the rooms the way peace filled my heart. One afternoon, as I was shelving books, a small boy tugged my sleeve. Miss Paisley. He whispered, "Do you have a son?" The question caught me off guard. I smiled faintly. "Yes, sweetheart, I do." "Does he visit you?" I looked out the window, sunlight streaking the floor. "Not yet," I said, "but maybe one day." That night, I returned home to find a letter waiting in my mailbox. The handwriting made my breath hitch. "Mom, you were right. We lost the house. We lost everything. But I found something else, a job, a sense of pride. Amber's trying too. I don't know if you'll ever want to see me again, but I wanted you to know we're sorry." "I'm sorry, Evan." Tears stung my eyes, soft and unexpected. I sat at the table holding that letter for a long time, not crying out of sadness but relief. Maybe this was what I wanted all along, not revenge, not victory, but understanding. The next morning I walked to the post office, bought a small card, and wrote only 3 words. "Take care, son." No signature, no return address. Months later, I saw them again, not in person, on social media. A local newspaper had posted a photo of volunteers cleaning up a public park. There they were, Evan and Amber, smiling faintly, sleeves rolled up, standing side by side. They looked human again. I saved the picture quietly and shut the phone. Life had come full circle. I spent the rest of that day by the sea, watching the tide roll in. The sky turned gold and the horizon burned with light. I thought about everything I'd lost, everything I'd gained. Sometimes retaliation isn't about destruction. It's about reclaiming the parts of yourself you gave away too easily. I breathed in, slow and deep, the salt air filling my lungs. The ache that used to live in my chest was gone. In its place was peace. And for the first time in my life, I whispered a prayer not for someone else but for me. I woke up before dawn that morning. The air was still and cold, the kind that makes the ocean look like glass. I poured myself coffee, sat by the window, and watched the horizon blush faintly with light. Life had found its rhythm again, quiet, steady, honest. It had been nearly a year since I'd left that house, since Evan's letter arrived. We hadn't spoken since, and I'd accepted that silence might be our final language. I didn't resent it anymore. That day, I decided to clean the attic. It had been untouched since I bought this cottage, just boxes of old memories left by the previous owner. Or so I thought. Dust rose in the sunlight as I pried open the first trunk. Inside were letters, faded photographs, and a small leather case wrapped in a yellowing cloth. It felt oddly familiar, though I couldn't recall why. I sat on the floor, unwrapped it carefully, and froze. Inside were documents, bank statements, property deeds all under my name, my full legal name, only these papers dated back 25 years. Before my husband had ever passed, before I'd even known we were in debt. One name on the signature line caught my eye, Harold Jameson. I hadn't thought about him in decades. My heart thudded as I remembered. Harold wasn't just anyone. He'd been my employer and my friend long before I met my husband. A kind man, widowed early, who'd once told me, "You've got the strength of 10 women, Paisley. Don't ever let anyone use that against you." When he died suddenly, I'd attended the funeral, then moved on. But now here were papers signed by him, transferring ownership of something, a property in another state, to me. I couldn't understand it. Had my husband known, had he hidden these? The answer came hours later in the form of a knock at my door. It startled me. No one ever came here unannounced. I opened it slowly and nearly dropped my coffee. It was Evan. He looked older, thinner, dressed plainly in jeans and a jacket too light for the cold. "Hi, Mom," he said softly. I didn't speak. My heart beat hard. Finally, I stepped aside. "Come in." He entered quietly, glancing around the cozy living room. "You've made this place nice," he said. His voice was gentler now, his arrogance gone. I nodded. "What brings you here?" He hesitated. "I found something, and I think you should see it." From his bag, he pulled out an envelope. Inside was a photograph of my husband, holding a document that looked exactly like the ones I'd found that morning. Behind him, in the corner of the photo, stood Harold Jameson. My breath caught. "Amber found this in one of Dad's old boxes," Evan said. "We think he was working for Harold before you married him. There are letters, too. They talked about money and about you. About me." He nodded. "Apparently Harold left you his estate, but Dad, he never told you. He forged a few signatures, kept it hidden, then sold part of the assets to cover his debts." The room swayed a little. I gripped the back of a chair to steady myself. "So all those years, we could have lived differently. I could have had security. Yes." He looked down, shame flickering in his eyes. "I came to say sorry. For everything, for the way we treated you, for not knowing any of this sooner. I was angry, but I didn't understand." I sat across from him, the silence stretching. For a long time, I just studied his face, the same eyes I'd once soothed after nightmares, the same mouth that had once called me Supermom. "Evan," I whispered, "why tell me now?" "Because," he said, voice cracking, "Amber and I are having a baby, and I don't want my child to grow up learning the same cruelty I gave you." The words hit me deeper than any apology could. I reached out slowly, placed my hand over his. "Then maybe this is the moment everything changes." He nodded, tears glinting. We sat there, the years of distance melting quietly between us. That evening, after he left, I opened the rest of Harold's documents. The property he'd left me wasn't just any land, it was a coastal estate worth far more than I'd ever imagined. All this time, I thought I'd started with nothing. But the truth was, I'd inherited everything only to have it stolen by deceit and then reclaimed through pain. I stood outside on the porch, letting the cold air wash over me. The sea below shimmered in silver light. And that's when I knew what I wanted to do next. If you've ever had truth knock on your door when you least expected it, when everything you believe turns ups, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to her Retaliation. Because sometimes revenge isn't about anger. It's about discovery. Days later, I traveled to the coastal estate Harold had left me. It was run down but breathtaking acres of green cliffs, an old mansion by the shore, and gardens overtaken by wild roses. The caretaker, a man in his 60s, met me with a kind smile. "You must be Mrs. Campbell," he said. "Mr. Jameson said you'd come someday." I blinked. He said that. He nodded. "Years ago, before he passed, he told me if she ever finds her way here, tell her she already knows what to do." My throat tightened. Knows what to do. The caretaker smiled softly. "He believed you'd turn this place into something meaningful. He said you were born to rebuild things, even broken people." I stood there, wind whipping my hair, eyes stinging. Maybe Harold had seen something in me I'd never seen myself. I spent the next few weeks restoring that estate. I hired locals, gave jobs to women who'd lost everything, widows, single mothers, those forgotten by the system. We turned the old house into a retreat, a place for healing and self-discovery. Word spread quickly. The media called it the haven of her retaliation. They didn't know the story behind the name, only that it was founded by a woman who had once been betrayed, but refused to be broken. One evening, as the sun dipped low, I heard footsteps on the gravel path. Evan and Amber were there, and this time, Amber held a baby in her arms. She approached nervously. "We wanted you to meet your granddaughter." The baby's eyes were blue like the sky, her tiny hand curling around my finger. My heart melted instantly. Amber's voice trembled. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Campbell, for everything I said, for the way I treated you. You didn't deserve that." I smiled softly. "Call me Paisley, and thank you." We stood there together, the ocean roaring behind us, generations bound by pain but truly trying to begin again. That night after they left, I sat in Harold's old study. On the desk lay one last sealed envelope, brittle with age. It had been hidden behind a loose drawer panel. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a letter, dated years before my husband's death. "My dearest Paisley, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I never told you what I felt because I knew your heart belonged to another. But I wanted you to have something that could never be taken from you, independence. I've watched you suffer quietly for others' comfort. One day you'll understand your worth, and when you do, this place will be yours. Use it to help, not to hurt. Yours always, Harold." Tears fell silently onto the paper. I pressed it to my chest, whispering, I finally understand, Harold. Outside, the waves crashed, fierce and alive. By dawn, I knew what to do. I renamed the estate the Jameson Campbell Foundation, in memory of both the man who saw my worth and the life that taught me strength. The retreat became a sanctuary for anyone rebuilding their life after betrayal, a place to rediscover purpose, to heal, to begin anew. Reporters came, articles were written, but I never gave interviews. I let the work speak for itself, and sometimes when the ocean wind carried laughter from the gardens, I could almost hear Harold's voice again, "You've got the strength of 10 women, Paisley." I smiled. "Maybe you were right," I whispered. "Maybe revenge wasn't the end. It was just the beginning." The night the storm hit, the ocean sounded like it was tearing itself apart. Wind howled through the cliffs, rattling the windows of the estate. I sat in Harold's study, the fireplace crackling, reading the final set of documents that made the Jameson Campbell Foundation fully mine. Everything was finally settled. Every paper, every account, every inch of land. For the first time in my life, I felt untouchable, until the phone rang. At first, I thought it might be Evan. He called occasionally now, just to check in. But the voice on the other end wasn't his. "Mrs. Campbell," a man said, his tone low, deliberate. "My name is Victor Hale. I believe we need to discuss the Jameson estate." My stomach tightened. I don't think there's anything left to discuss. He chuckled softly. "Oh, I think there is. You see, I represent a group of investors who claim Mr. Jameson wasn't of sound mind when he signed over that property to you. They're seeking to contest the transfer retroactively." I froze. "That's absurd. It's been decades." "True," he said, "but when money's involved, time tends to become flexible. Expect to hear from my legal team soon." He hung up before I could reply. I sat in the silence that followed, the crackle of the fire suddenly sounding like distant laughter. Was it happening again? Was everything I'd built about to be taken away again? The next morning I called Mr. Adams, my lawyer. He sounded grim. "They've filed a claim in probate court. They're alleging fraud, claiming your late husband manipulated Harold Jameson into signing over the property illegally." My pulse pounded. That's ridiculous. I didn't even know Harold had left me anything. "I know, Paisley, but proving that could take months, maybe longer." I looked out the window at the crashing waves, the cliffs dark under gray clouds. "Do whatever it takes." I said quietly. "They can't win." The days that followed blurred together, meetings, calls, papers spread across my desk. For a while, the foundation had to pause operations while we verified every record. Then one afternoon, while going through Harold's old correspondence, I found something odd, a small sealed envelope marked private in his handwriting. I opened it carefully. Inside was a letter and a photograph. The letter read, "If anyone questions my decision, this is my witness. She knows the truth. She was there when I signed everything over. H.J." Attached to it was a photo of Harold with a woman, dark hair, sharp eyes, standing in front of the old house. On the back he'd written a name, Margaret Hale. Hale. My blood went cold. Victor Hale. The man who called me. His mother. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing his voice in my head, smooth, confident, dangerous. The next day I called him directly. "You're Harold Jameson's godson, aren't you?" I said. "Your mother was Margaret Hale." There was a pause. "So you've done your homework. Why are you doing this?" "My mother worked for Harold for 10 years, he said evenly. "When he died, she got nothing. You got everything. Tell me, does that seem fair to you?" "He gave it to me because he trusted me." I said, "Not because I asked for it." Victor laughed coldly. "You mean because you charmed him? My mother said you had a way with older men. Sweet, loyal Paisley, always at the right place, right time." The insult stung more than I expected. "You have no idea what kind of man he was or what kind of woman I am. We'll see," he said. "Court starts next week." The days leading up to the hearing were chaos. Reporters showed up at the estate gate, sniffing for scandal. Some headlines read, "Mysterious beneficiary faces fraud allegations in coastal inheritance case." I ignored them. I'd learned long ago that silence was the sharpest weapon. Evan offered to come with me to court, but I refused. "You have your family." I told him, "I'll handle this." He hugged me tightly before I left. "Mom, don't let them break you again." "I won't," I said, and I meant it. The courtroom was cold, sterile, filled with whispers. Victor Hale sat across the aisle, tall, composed, his expression unreadable. When his eyes met mine, I saw nothing but calculation. His lawyer painted me as an opportunist, a grieving widow who'd manipulated an aging man for wealth. They showed the letters, the property deeds. even photos of me with Harold, twisting friendship into something sordid. When my turn came to speak, I rose slowly, my palms trembling only slightly. I never asked Harold for a thing. I said, my voice steady. He helped me when my husband couldn't. He saw my worth when others didn't. If kindness is a crime, then yes, I'm guilty. But this house, this land, it wasn't payment, it was faith. The courtroom went still. Then Mr. Adams stepped forward. Your Honor, he said, we have new evidence. He handed the judge a folder. Inside were documents, the very ones from the attic, bearing Harold's original handwriting and the witness signature of Margaret Hale herself. Gasps filled the room. Victor's face went pale. The judge looked up. Mr. Hale, do you have an explanation for why your own mother witnessed this transfer and never contested it during her lifetime? Victor stammered. I wasn't aware, then perhaps. The judge said sharply, you should have done your homework. The case collapsed within days. The court ruled in my favor, affirming my full ownership of the estate. Victor vanished from public view. When it was over, I drove back to the cliffs, the sun setting gold over the sea. I stood outside the house, the wind tugging at my coat, the sky glowing like embers. For a long time I said nothing. Then, softly, I whispered, it's done. But deep down, I knew revenge had taken a different shape this time. It wasn't about destroying someone, it was about surviving their storm and still standing tall. If you've ever had someone try to steal your peace and you took it back, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to her Retaliation. Because strength isn't silence. It's the voice you find after they try to take it away. A few months later, I received a letter with no return address. Inside was a single line written in elegant handwriting. You won this time, Mrs. Campbell, but some ghosts never rest, no signature. But I knew it was Victor. I burned the letter in the fireplace, watched it turn to ash. Then I went outside and planted a tree near the cliffs, a young oak, roots deep, unshakable. I wanted something that would outlive all of us. The foundation flourished. Women from across the country came to rebuild their lives. The media called me the widow of the waves, a woman who turned betrayal into legacy. And sometimes, when the ocean was calm, I'd swear I could hear Harold's voice again, whispering through the wind, You've done well, Paisley. I'd close my eyes, smile, and whisper back, No, Harold, we did. The waves crashed below, fierce and endless. Life moved forward, and with every sunrise, I remembered retaliation isn't always about revenge. Sometimes it's just about finally being free.